9-7, we're at the end of the chapter. So want to tie this division, dividing integers, numbers without decimals, into multiplication that we did in the last section. So I want to start out by saying multiplication and division are inverse operations. So inverse operations are things that undo each other. So say you start out with like $5, and then your rich uncle says, hey, I'm going to double the amount of money you have. So multiplies it by 2, that gets you up to $10. So that's kind of one way. Well, if then you remember you owe money to your brother because you borrowed it so he could go on a date, and you divide that money you have by 2, you end up right back where you started with the 5. So multiplying by 2, dividing by 2, they're inverses. They undo each other. One will take you from 5 to 10, the other takes you back where you started. How in the world does that tie in? Well, if you know the product of two numbers, so I have a typo, yours will be fixed, I hope, of two numbers, you can find the two quotients. My guess is those terms might not make a ton of sense, but going back to when we're doing multiplication, the two things that we're multiplying are called the factors. So in other words, I'm trying to say if you can find the product, the product is this thing over here. So 9 times 7 we know is 63. So if we know 63, that can help us with two division problems, because like we did up here, multiplication and division are just kind of like ways to undo each other. So in other words, if I have a 63 and I'm dividing it by 7, that's going to give me this 9 right there. And they probably taught you this when you were going back and trying to learn division, because division is harder than multiplication. That if you know your multiplication tables, that can help bail you out for some of these other ones. So, and I can do that same thing here. If I have 63, like I have the 63, I want to divide it by 9. Well, that's going to give me the 7. So without using the word product and quotient and all that, here's maybe a way that makes more sense. If you know which two numbers multiplied equals something, if you're starting with that and dividing by one of those, you can know the other one, which can help make the division a lot easier. All right, so steps for this thing here. One, kind of like the last notes, I kind of do step 3 a little bit higher, but these rules are the exact same as the multiplication section. I really could just copy those right from the last page of the notes. But if you have a positive divided by a positive, it's going to give you a positive answer. If you have only one negative, so here I have a positive divided by a negative, or same thing if you have a negative divided by a positive, if there's only one negative, you're going to get a negative answer. And if you have a negative divided by a negative, just like multiplying two negatives cancel, dividing two negatives cancel and leave you with a positive. So if you have an odd number of negatives in the problem, you'll get a negative answer. If you have an even number of negatives, or 0 negatives, you'll get a positive. All right, let's go do an example of each of those. So 10 divided by 5, they're both positive. So that just gives us a 2 for our final answer. 10 divided by 5 is 2. All right, this next one, I have 10 divided by a negative 5. So it's not a minus sign. That's really trying to say 10 divided by a negative. Well, if I have one negative, it gives me a negative for my answer. 10 divided by 5 is 2. All right, now here, I have two negative numbers. So those negatives are going to cancel each other out, leave me with a positive answer, but we don't write the plus in our final answer because that wouldn't be simplified. So we just know the answer is going to be positive, and 10 divided by 5 is 2. So kind of did all of it together really just in this first step, which is probably poor teaching, but sorry about that. So you divide the numbers without their signs to get the, I don't know, quotient, maybe I should say, but I'm going to say the number. Just that told us for those examples that it was a 2 each time. And then you have to make sure you have the correct sign with it, either no sign for positive or a negative sign for negative. All right, few examples and we are done. So if I have 12 divided by 3, they're both positive, which means my answer has to be positive. So I don't put a negative sign in, and 12 divided by 3 is 4. Another way to think about that is what times 3 gives me 12. And it's 3 times 4 is 12, so 12 divided by 3 is 4. All right, second example, we have one negative there. That means our answer has to have a negative. So I put my negative sign in right now. 24 divided by 8. You can say, well, how many times is 8 going to 24? Or what times 8 is 24? And we get a 3, so the answer is going to be a -3. Any chance you guys want to speak to the math video and say how much you love math?
I got you.
All right. We have a guest speaker here. His name is Sasha Daverman.
So good. Best math teacher in the world. Made math fun for me. I hated it.
Here's your $20. All right, last example. We have two negatives. -42 divided by a -6. So two negatives are going to be a positive, so we don't put in a plus. We just leave it nothing. And what times 6 gives me 42? That's kind of what I'm looking at. You can just do it without the negatives now. And that's a 7. So final answer, +7. That's it for the section. If I lost you, oh, bummer. That's almost it for the section. I baited and switched. Okay, Uncle Edgar played mini golf. Par is a typical number of strokes or shots for a hole. Scores above par are positive, scores below are negative. On the first 5 holes, Uncle Edgar's scores were -2, -1, 1 above par, 2 below, and 1 below. What's his mean score for these holes? All right, so mean is just the fancy word for average. So we're going to go through figure out what's his average. And to do that, we add all those together. That's a sloping line there, but all right, so we have a -2 plus a -1 plus a +1 plus a -2 plus a -1. So we do that and we count up our number of scores, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we need to divide by 5. I like taking all those double sign things and just making it one sign. So maybe get rid of those, make it a little easier to see. So I have a -2, just a -1, and then a +1, -2, -1. So people do this different ways. You could just kind of work across it left to right. You can't jump in the middle, or that'll mess things up unless you're careful with how you do it. So maybe let's just work left to right. So -2, take away 1. So if I have 2 negatives and 1 negative, that gives me 3 negatives. So I have 3 negatives plus 1. That's going to cancel with one of my 3 negatives, so I'm down to -2. Now I have -2 and then another -2, so I have 4 negatives total. So this gets me up to -4 minus another 1 gets me to -5. All right, so Uncle Edgar is 5 under par after those 5 holes. So to figure out his average, we take and divide that by 5. And, well, division. 1 negative is going to make it a negative in our answer. 5 divided by 5 is 1. That's it. So average is -1. Let me know if you have questions. Be glad to help you in class. Have a good one.